What do you do if you are breastfeeding, but you also care about body composition post-pregnancy? You've probably gotten mixed messages like don't touch your diet while nursing or just eat less and move more like everyone else. These are all incomplete prescriptions, then they often ignore what's happening inside your body while you're producing milk. Today, I'm going to walk through the hormonal and metabolic picture of a nursing mother, what the research says about when and how it's safe to adjust your nutrition, and 3 signs that tell you if you've pushed too far, because of course the priority is always your baby and your health first, and then your physique goals second. Welcome to Wits and Weights, the show that puts a popular piece of fitness advice under the microscope, finds the hidden reason it doesn't work, and gives you the deceptively simple fix that does. I'm your host, Philip Pape, and today's episode was inspired by a listener question. It's one of the best that I've gotten in a while. Katie S. wrote in. She's 42 years old, 5'2", nursing her 9-month-old, which is her 8th baby. She's been lifting for about 3 years. She hits her protein most days, and she's watching her body slowly change. She's at about 145 pounds, which is 20 pounds above what used to be her normal weight. But her goal is not to get back to 124. It's more like 130 because she's accounting for some of that muscle that she's built. And Katie, if you're listening, that right there is what tells me that you are thinking about this correctly, because you are not chasing a number from 10 years ago. You're building a different body for a different time of life. And what you described, losing 5 pounds during a winter illness and then seeing muscle definition emerge because the muscle was already there underneath, shows me that you were going through body recomp, right? It is happening. And sometimes it's very hard to see. I just had a client call where she had lost 1.2 pounds, but within that was about 6 or 7 pounds of fat loss and about 4 or 5 pounds of muscle gain. So sometimes it's hard to see that because it's slow enough that it doesn't always feel like progress when you're living it day to day. Now, quick note before we go further. I am not a doctor. I'm not a lactation consultant. Nothing in this episode replaces working with those experts. What I am is someone who reads research. I coach women through these situations. Yes, I'm a husband. Yes, I have children as well. And I care about these things. I care about all the women in my life, no matter who they are. And I think breastfeeding is an important topic. I think we need to talk about these things and understand what's happening with the body. I've worked with women pre and post pregnancy, those who lift up to very late in term, and then even right after. One of my friends and former clients, she probably knows who she is listening to the show, won a powerlifting meet just a few months after having her child. So everything I'm going to share today is grounded in peer-reviewed evidence. I'll be specific about where it's strong and where it's not so strong. But if you have specific medical concerns about your milk supply, your hormones, your baby's growth, please work with your healthcare team on that. And then stick around to the end, because after the main content, I am going to share 3 quick signs that tell you whether your nutrition approach is too aggressive for nursing. These are simple things you can check this week. They'll give you some real-time feedback on whether your body is handling the adjustment well, so that you know this before you make any changes. So here's what we're going to cover today. First, why the 2 main camps of advice for nursing mothers tend to miss the mark in different ways. Second, what's actually happening hormonally, metabolically while you're breastfeeding, and why that tends to change the equation for things like muscle, fat storage, and even, of course, your recovery. And third, I'll give you some practical tips for supporting your body composition while protecting your milk supply and your health, because the order of those priorities does matter, and we're going to try to get that right for you. All right. Let's get into it. So you are a woman who's nursing, or maybe you plan to nurse, or you know somebody who's nursing, you want to share this with them. You care about how you look and how you feel. You do want to get back to some level of, feeling like yourself again, let's say. Although having a baby is an incredible experience in its own right. And please don't be so hard on yourself, ladies. But that's easy for me to say as a guy, right? I get it. So you've probably run into different messages on social media, and they tend to be in opposition, but kind of 2 sides of the same coin. The first one is that you shouldn't mess with your diet while you're breastfeeding, that your baby needs every calorie. Just wait till you're done nursing, then worry about your body. And it sounds protective and responsible, right? You're trying to nurse and bring up a human being and help them grow really quickly. Quickly compared to when they get older, right? Because babies consume a lot and grow very fast. So it comes from a real place of love. And in that first 6 to 8 weeks postpartum, your supply is being established. There's all the new habits and the bond with your baby. any significant calorie restriction can genuinely interfere with milk production. That part is totally true. And then during that early window, the absolute right call for most women is you got to eat enough. And you have to focus on your recovery and let your body do what it needs to do, and just focus on the baby, focus on that bonding, focus on that, your milk supply and all that, because you've gone through what amounts to kind of a trauma, right? Having gone through pregnancy. But then those same people, they take that legitimate early postpartum caution and then they stretch it across the entire duration of breastfeeding, which could be a year, 2 years or longer. I mean, we have 2 daughters. Our first had trouble getting enough from breast milk because she would spit up a lot. So we supplemented with formula. And so she didn't breastfeed for too long, maybe up to a year max. And our second went almost 2 years because she was, she was drinking it up and growing from it, and that's all she needed. And then we started to add in food when the time was right, in addition to the breast milk. So it can be quite a long time. So, the first few months, as we just said, are super important to focus on the recovery of the milk supply. But then after that, we could start looking at these other approaches. The evidence just doesn't support a blanket prohibition that far out. There was a landmark study published in the New England Journal of Medicine by Lovelady and colleagues. What a nice name, Lovelady. 40 overweight, exclusively breastfeeding women were randomized to either a 500 calorie a day deficit with exercise 4 times a week or the control group. And they started this at 4 weeks postpartum. So the diet plus exercise group lost about 4.8 kilograms over 10 weeks. And there was no effect on infant growth. None at all. Another group went even more aggressive here, imposing a 35% deficit for 11 days in exclusively breastfeeding women. Again, no adverse effects on milk volume, milk composition, prolactin levels, or infant weight. So the idea that a calorie restriction during established lactation, right? You've gotten to the point where you've had a baseline of successful established lactation, that it's going to hurt your baby. That is not supported by the research in well-nourished women. Now, that distinction matters. You have to have established lactation, adequate total intake, and be well-nourished. Not close to postpartum, not extreme restriction of your diet, not malnourished. Now, the other camp 2 here, has the opposite problem, I'll say, where they give generic postpartum body composition advice. You've heard of this, like just eat in a deficit, train hard, track your macros, same as everyone else. And that might work fine for some women, but it ignores the pretty significant hormone and metabolic shifts, right? Shifts in your metabolism that happen during lactation. Because what's happening? Your estrogen is suppressed, your prolactin is elevated, your body's allocating hundreds of calories a day to producing milk. Your sleep is probably terrible. And these definitely change the whole equation for how aggressive you can be, like it would anybody. But in your case, you've got these specific pressures, and it changes what your protein needs are. It changes what your body does with the calorie deficit. The calories in an equation can change drastically. And so treating a nursing mother's body the same as a non-nursing body is just sloppy. It's the generalization and oversimplification that so many people get into, even when they mean well. But honestly, I don't think you mean too well if you don't get to that next level. Now, if you're nursing in your, say, late 30s or 40s, so we're getting to, I hate the term geriatric pregnancy, right? It seems crazy at that age. But, as you get closer to that, menopause age and you're nursing, there's like another layer of stuff to deal with where perimenopause is entering the picture and you have these 2 different hormonal states clashing together. And I don't think that's been studied at all, to be honest, but we are going to talk a little bit about that. So those are the camps that we have. That's where the advice is coming from as a baseline, if we look at, what's generally discussed out there. But I want to actually go into the next topic here, which is what's happening in your body. What's going on with hormones? Okay, when you're breastfeeding, especially when it's frequent breastfeeding, it's a common thing for you. Your body is suppressing the estrogen. You've got prolactin is high. That's what drives the milk production. The elevated prolactin shuts down normal hormonal cycling. So your estradiol drops to somewhere around 4 to 47 picograms per milliliter if you were to look at it on the lab. Whereas a normal premenopausal woman is like up at 30 to 400, right? Quite a bit higher. A breastfeeding woman who doesn't have her period, so we call that amenorrheic, can be sitting at like as low as 4 picograms per milliliter. And that's comparable to a postmenopausal woman. So your progesterone is basically zero because you're not ovulating. And hormonally, a nursing mother's body looks like a menopausal body in terms of estrogen status. And that's whatever age you are, whether you're 28 or 42 or whatever, that the lactation hormones do all that. Now, why does all this matter? Why is a dude on Wits and Weights talking about this? Okay, a few reasons. First of all, we've never talked about this, and so this is like a definitive episode on this. Low estrogen shifts fat storage toward your midsection. Okay, we know this is a challenge for perimenopause, right? It causes menobelly. It's a popular term. Research shows that when estrogen drops, whether from menopause or from lactation, you're going to preferentially deposit visceral fat. So if your body shape feels like it's changing during breastfeeding, if you're carrying more around the middle than you used to, that's probably a real thing. There's an actual hormonal mechanism behind that. And I know that's tough when you've just had a baby and you're trying to lose that belly weight, but now it seems to be counteracting it. Low estrogen also creates anabolic resistance. Your muscles become less responsive to the signals that drive that muscle growth, like your training and your protein. This means you probably need more protein, maybe more per meal, more per day, for the same muscle protein synthesis response. And then your insulin sensitivity can be affected because lactation adds insulin resistance to support milk production, and then that tilts the metabolism toward fat storage as well. So combined with low estrogen, your body's in a state where it is prioritizing the baby's energy supply. And that makes total sense, right? From an evolutionary standpoint, your body's doing its job. But it means you just can't follow standard advice and think it's going to work. Now, if you're nursing in your late 30s or 40s, there's that second layer I mentioned. We talked about estrogen fluctuating wildly, irregular cycles, your progesterone's declining, and then that combines with the lactation stuff going on, and now you have this like deeper, more sustained low estrogen state than either of those would create on their own. And I don't know that this has been studied directly. I'm going to be honest about that. I think any recommendation for a woman who is simultaneously nursing and perimenopausal is probably extrapolated from like adjacent research, right? Not direct studies for that population, which is a problem in women's health in general, as we know. There is a bright spot here. I always like to find the silver linings here. Every time you nurse, your body releases oxytocin. Oxytocin suppresses cortisol and lowers blood pressure. This is the one released because of the bond with your baby, right? It's the motherhood coming out. Even fathers can have an impact when you're with your baby. That's why they like all the touching and being close, right after the baby's born. So after about 6 weeks of breastfeeding, this buffer on your stress, it persists even 6 weeks after of breastfeeding, even between feedings. So the breastfeeding is giving you some protection against the cortisol-driven visceral fat storage that sleep deprivation and the stress you have would otherwise cause. So it kind of gives you a little bit of an advantage there. One more thing worth knowing is that extended breastfeeding seems to delay menopause onset. Data from the Nurses' Health Study found that women who breastfed 25 or more months total had AMH levels. That's like your ovarian reserve, like a marker of your ovarian reserve, how many eggs you have. It's about 39% higher than those who breastfed less. So our listener who wrote in, Katie, with your history, your perimenopausal symptoms could be partly lactation driven and partly reversible once you wean off. It doesn't change what you're doing now, but it's worth knowing that context. So when we summarize it all together, what do you have? You have suppressed estrogen, elevated prolactin, some insulin resistance, tendency to store more fat in your belly, anabolic resistance in your muscles, but also a built-in buffer against the stress, the cortisol because of the nursing. So that's kind of what you have to play with. What do you do with this information now? Okay, so I just got done telling you that sleep might be the single most important variable for body composition while nursing, and that a 3-hour difference in sleep changed fat loss by more than half in a controlled study. And I know if you're nursing a baby, the idea of getting better sleep seems hilarious, maybe, maybe like a cruel joke. Whether or not your husband's helping out. Now, I was working, my wife wasn't. Fortunately, I was able to get a little more sleep because she was breastfeeding, but that's not always the situation. You can't control when the baby wakes up either. So there's that. But here's what you do control. What happens when you finally lie down? How fast you fall asleep, how deeply you stay asleep during those windows that you actually get. And that's where the physical environment matters a ton more than people think. Temperature regulation is a huge one. Nursing mothers tend to run warmer, especially at night. And overheating is one of the most common sleep disruptors. So naturally, I'm going to segue into our sponsor for today's episode, Cozy Earth, because Cozy Earth, who I love as a company, very ethical, really good people at that company. They make bamboo-derived bedding and sleepwear that regulates temperature, and it does so better than anything I've tried. So if you're nursing, this could be a nice, luxurious gift for you, for yourself, or maybe hint to somebody who's looking to get you a gift, maybe for the baby shower. I don't know. Their sheets are very breathable. They stay cool without feeling cold. They get softer over time instead of piling. I also use their bamboo-derived pajamas along with the sheets and the cuddle blanket. And anyway, the difference for me with all of this is falling asleep faster, waking up less. And so for someone who's nursing, who only gets sleep in 2 or 3 hour blocks, getting deeper sleep during those blocks is a huge advantage. So that's Cozy Earth. Go to witsandweights.com/Cozy Earth if you want to support the podcast and also improve your sleep quality. They have a 100-night sleep trial, a 10-year warranty. So absolutely no risk on that. Go to witsandweights.com/Cozy Earth. You'll get a code WitsandWeights for 20% off when you go to that link. witsandweights.com/Cozy Earth. If you're in that season where every hour of rest has to count, then just make it count. And Cozy Earth is a great move for that. And you would support the show. witsandweights.com/Cozy Earth. All right, so after that very natural segue to our sponsor, we're now going to get back to the framework here. What is happening in the body is what we just covered. Now we're going to talk about what the approach should look like. Now, the goal here is not to lose weight while breastfeeding. Okay, let me say that again. The goal is not to lose weight while breastfeeding. The goal is to support your health, to protect your milk supply, to preserve and build your muscle, and let your body composition improve as a byproduct of doing those things well. Does that make sense? I hope that makes sense. It's a very healthy approach to take that I prefer for anybody, let alone nursing mothers who have these extra challenges going on. If you approach it that way, with the baby and your health as the top priorities, then the physique changes actually follow from what I've seen. So don't look at this as a guy trying to, tell you what to do and that you can't lose weight or can't lose fat. I'm saying that actually a more efficient way to do it is to prioritize the health in your muscle and things like that. If you flip those around, if you chase the number on the scale while you nurse, you're going to run into problems because there's a lot of other variables at play that make it more complicated, right? So we've got our 4 pieces here. We've got nutrition, protein, sleep, and movement. For nutrition, I'm going to say that after you've established your lactation and you've been well fed and well nourished and not worried too much about calories during those first 2 to 3 months, then a moderate calorie adjustment, which usually comes by tracking and awareness, is totally doable. It's totally supported by the research. It shouldn't be a huge deficit if you're still breastfeeding, but as much as 500 calories a day, which is 1 pound a week of weight loss, is totally doable. It's totally doable. It's perfectly healthy. It's perfectly fine. Of course, the actual number is going to depend on your size and how you can handle it with things like hunger and biofeedback, but you're still burning a lot of calories, like around 350 to 450 calories a day producing milk at 9 months postpartum. So your energy expenditure is higher than a non-nursing woman of the same size. And then that works in your favor because then you can eat more total food and still be in that modest deficit, right? But the calorie floor itself depends on your size. When you hear never go below X while nursing, 1,800 calories while nursing, that comes from the Lovelady study I mentioned because they didn't prescribe anything below that, but that's all that was. And that population was larger women on average. There's another research-based floor from data that's 1,500 calories, where below that it got a little bit dicey, but in reality, below 1,500 or 1,200 for most people, it starts to get a little dicey anyway. So for a smaller woman like our listener, Katie, at 5'2", the hard floor is probably closer to her around 1,500, not 1,800. But again, I don't know the exact number. It depends. So the practical approach to do it is calculate your deficit from your actual TDEE, your actual expenditure. Use something like macrofactor so you're not just doing a calculator. You want to have been tracking. So actually, it's helpful if you're tracking your food while postpartum, even if you're not using that to go into deficit yet, just so you know what your maintenance calories are. And it might be pretty cool to see what happens to your maintenance over the course of breastfeeding over that time. So that's something we can definitely help with if you wanted to reach out. But if you're early postpartum or if you have any concerns with your supply, don't use a deficit. Eat to support your recovery and your baby. There's no rush on this. Now, protein. This is probably where most nursing mothers are falling short, even if you think you're doing well, because most people fall short. And the need for breastfeeding women is probably 50 to 100% higher than the RDA. And there are recommendations out there that are higher. I don't know if from an official agency. And that's before you add strength training and the other things that we want you to do on top of that. So guess what? We're going to go with a typical advice for protein for a pregnant woman just as well, 0.7 to 1 grams per pound or more. So for someone Katie's size, our listener at 145 pounds, that's anywhere from like 120 to even up to 160 if you want to go above the 1 gram per pound. And then spread your protein across meals, at least 30 to 40 per meal, so that you can just maximize all of this and make it more practical. And that's what I would say for that. If you think about breast tissue, the mammary gland, it consumes a significant amount of those branched chain amino acids to produce milk. So you're actually draining your amino acids, and that's why probably even going higher on the protein can be helpful. All right, now sleep. Come on, this is the most important variable of all in this population, and I'll be honest, in most people's lives, period, because we don't get enough of it. But it is also the hardest one to control. There was a study from Nedelcheva that put subjects on the exact same calorie deficit with the exact same exercise, but one group slept 8.5 hours and the other slept 5.5. This is a famous study about sleep deprivation. And the sleep-restricted group lost 55% less fat and lost 60% more muscle. All right, so they had less fat loss and more muscle loss with the same food and the same exercise, but they had less sleep. So their bodies preferentially broke down muscle and preserved fat, and that's not what we want generally. We know that sleep deprivation also increases ghrelin by 28%, decreases leptin by about 18%, and that means you're going to consume up to 500 more calories a day, and you're going to seek out higher sugar, higher fat type comfort foods. So you're hungrier, you crave foods that don't serve you as much. The deficit you're in maybe is actually coming somewhat from your muscle, and that's why aggressive dieting on bad sleep is one of the worst things you can do. So for a nursing mother, where you're nursing through the night, I'm not going to pretend you can just sleep more, but there are some findings from the research that are helpful to know. The first one is that resistance training during periods of sleep restriction help maintain muscle protein synthesis at normal levels. So training kind of rescues you a bit from muscle loss, which makes sense because we talk about strength training as a way to preserve muscle, okay? So, training postpartum is still something highly encouraged. Secondly, even an extra 1.2 hours of sleep per night led to eating 270 fewer calories the next day without any other intervention. So really, every extra hour of sleep you just can figure out to negotiate in there somehow. A nap when the baby naps, going to bed 30 minutes earlier, having your partner take a feeding if that's possible, all of that's going to help you. And then we have movement. Katie mentioned that steps and swimming for her are hard to fit in. And, she's right that the activity matters, but the type matters more than anything here. You guys know how I talk about strategic cardio versus your NEAT, your non-exercise activity, which is primarily your steps and your walking. And when I look at Katie's day, I can see where it's tough to get that NEAT because she's sitting in the passenger seat for her the hours her teens are driving. She's sitting while homeschooling. She's sitting while nursing. She's standing in the kitchen cooking. And that's still stationary. No offense, Katie. Standing burns a few more calories than sitting. But obviously, if you're in place, it's still a lot of stationary lack of movement, not because you're not trying. It's how your life is structured. It's how crazy things are. And a lot of nursing mothers are going to recognize something very similar probably in their own routines. So the fix is not, let me add in a 45-minute swim, it's rethinking or reframing the hours that you're stationary. What can you do instead? Can you stand at the counter for homeschool instead of the table? Can you walk your younger kids around the block while the teens drive? I don't know. Can you pace during the room, phone calls pace your room during phone calls? And these sound like small things, but they add up. That, going from like 5,000 to 7,000 steps can be helpful. And an extra 20 minutes a day spread throughout the day could be an extra 200 or 300 calories burned, right? On the swimming specifically, Katie, I think it's an awesome option for like joint friendly conditioning. But the quirk here is that there was a study that found swimmers lost no weight over 6 months, while walkers lost 10% of the body weight because cold water stimulates appetite. Now, I'm not saying swimming's bad for you. I'm just saying if body composition is a goal, walking in general daily movement might give you a better return per hour without appetite compensation. But that was just a little side tangent that I found in my research. So I guess what I'm saying is this: nursing doesn't mean you have to put your body on hold for a year or two. The evidence does support a moderate, patient, protein-forward approach once you've established lactation. And then the biggest threats to that process are not the calorie deficit, but things like inadequate protein, inadequate sleep, and of course, inadequate patience. Before we wrap up, I did promise you 3 signs that tell you whether your nutritional approach is too aggressive for nursing. That's coming up in a second. But if this episode resonated with you, if you're a woman who lifts and pays attention to her nutrition, but isn't seeing the results you expected, whether you're nursing or not, especially if the hormonal shifts feel like a factor in your life, I want to tell you about Eat More, Lift Heavy. It's a 26-week coaching program that I built with Coach Carol. It launches March 30th. Today, as this episode comes out, is the last day to get on the wait list for Founders pricing, because it's going to go up pretty darn soon. So as soon as you hear this episode, I want you to go to witsandweights.com/eatmore. witsandweights.com/eatmore. What's going to happen is you'll lock in a lower rate permanently for as long as you stay enrolled with that pricing that's going to go away within a few days, and it's going to go up and never come down again. What do you get? You get a training program assigned to you in week 1 based on your specific situation. There's a monthly live coaching call with me and Carol. There is a 26-week program. It's a process week by week with one focus per week. It sequences you through along the way. It makes it very accessible, low stress, and achievable so you can build those skills. 54% of our members report hormonal concerns. And so the curriculum has a dedicated module on hormonal pattern awareness. So this is a coaching program. It's not a content library. We have a section that has all these other courses and things that were part of Physique University. But this program is one sequence over 26 weeks that gives you a custom launch plan in week 1, custom, selected training plan, and then all the support and accountability along the way to get to the goal that you want. If that sounds like what you need, go to witsandweights.com/eatmore. Get on the wait list, witsandweights.com/eatmore. All right, if you're nursing and you're adjusting your nutrition at the same time, here are 3 signs that tell you you've gone too far. Number 1, when your supply dips at a specific feed, usually the late afternoon or the evening one, milk production is lowest when cortisol is highest. So if your energy intake's too low, then that vulnerable feed is the first one to drop. If you notice the baby is fussier or less satisfied at one particular feeding, and then it's consistent for a few days, that's the signal. So again, your supply dips at a specific feeding. And again, it's usually late afternoon or evening, but not necessarily. Number 2 is a wet diaper count. This is a very objective measure. So talk about data tracking. Wet diapers. Less than 6 wet diapers per day in an infant probably means inadequate hydration, which can reflect reduced milk volume. No need to freak out. It's just something to track. If you've been tracking this, I think you should be. Most of us, when I remember us, we knew exactly how many wet diapers there were a day. If there's a drop from your baby's normal baseline, that's something to look at. That's what I'm suggesting. Number 3 is that your own hunger is constant and very intense, right? Not just like, yeah, I could eat, but I can't stop thinking about food. And if you have that level of hunger while you're nursing, it means your deficit is too big for what your body's trying to produce. That is your brain through biofeedback telling you that the energy math isn't working right now. So if you see any of these, the fix is actually quite simple. Eat more. Eat more. Add 200 to 300 calories for a few days. Reassess all of these things. You can always tighten it up later. Your milk supply is harder to rebuild than the deficit is to reintroduce. All right. I hope this was helpful. I know it's a very unique topic for Wits and Weights, but I think it's an important one. And thank you, Katie, for the question. If anybody wants to submit a question for the podcast, go to witsandweights.com/question. Until next time, keep using your wits, lifting those weights, and remember, your body is doing incredible work right now. Support it first, and the results will come. I'm Philip Pape, and I'll talk to you next time here on the Wits and Weights podcast. This podcast is for educational purposes only and is not intended as medical advice. Please consult your healthcare provider before making any health changes. Some links mentioned may be affiliate links, which means I may earn a commission at no extra cost to you if you choose to purchase.